Hello, and welcome to PentaLive from Pentalog. My name's Peter Green. I'm in New York, and my microphone is now working. I want to welcome you here to a show we call DEF CON 19, where we give you some of the tools you need to thrive in the COVID-19 era. Today, our special guest is Bruno Lavrol, coming to us from San Francisco, California, where it's a little bit earlier than it is here in New York. Thanks for getting up this early. Bruno has set up and run for more than a decade an entirely virtual company specialized in software and data for the pharma industry. He's going to talk to us about how you create a virtual company. This is particularly relevant because, as you all may have heard, Jack Dorsey yesterday, the president founder of Twitter, said that when his company comes back to work, which won't be before September, many of the employees will be able to work from home forever, permanently. We'll be back with Bruno right after this. Bruno, welcome to PentaLive from Pentalog. I forgot a short plug just before I get to you. After this interview is over, about a half hour later at 2 o'clock Eastern Time, we're going to be hosting a webinar with Pentalog's Chief Growth Officer, Jeff Mignon. He's going to be teaching us about something called a growth jam, which is a regular event your company can hold. Takes about 90 minutes to hold the event every few weeks to find ways to fill up your backlog with incoming projects and develop something called the minimum viable test, which is how to see if new business strategies are working. That'll come up after this, about a half hour later. It's not on this platform, so sign-up information is available and viewable in the chat accompanying this show. Hope to see some of you there. Meanwhile, let's go back to California. And Bruno, tell us a little bit about what your company does and why it is entirely virtual.
Yes, certainly. And bonjour. I like the way you pronounce my name. That was perfectly done, Peter. I nearly wanted to call you Pierre.
Thank you.
On that. And I know Jeff also has somewhat of a French accent in a moment. So you'll be used to the French accent. So our company sells software and data to the pharmaceutical industry. So, for example, if a pharma company is interested to develop drugs in the COVID space, we will tell them through our platform, a SaaS platform essentially, who is doing what are the drugs at different stages of development, what do their competitors do, what is the market need. So it's a competitive intelligence platform essentially for the pharma industry.
And so how does this work? You know, this sounds like the kind of thing where you'd have to have a lot of smart people meeting all the time in the same room, poring over things together. And yet somehow, as you mentioned to me when we spoke earlier, one of your longest serving employees is halfway across the country, and in 10 years, you've never met her. How do you keep a company together that is so displaced and so virtual?
So we are 125 people, and nobody's in the same office. And you're right. My number two in the company, wonderful lady, Dr. Aviva Friedman, based in Detroit. And I've never met her, and I don't want to meet her because we're working so well together virtually that I'm afraid that if we meet in person, the spell will be broken, and all of a sudden the relationship will be different. So the model has been since the beginning to work virtually. Now, we used to feel pretty special because not many companies did it 10 years ago, 12 years ago. A few did, right? There's a few companies, TopTal, WordPress, GitHub, but not many. But it's going to be interesting to see how COVID changes that. So we'll discuss that a little bit. So it is certainly a challenge, but it's a challenge that we've chosen since the beginning. So we decided to establish the company as a completely virtual business.
And what's the advantage to that? Why is that a good idea, apart from the fact that maybe you live in a place that others don't want to live?
Well, that's right. I'm sure a lot of people want to live in San Francisco, but it can be challenging, obviously, and many people have different constraints about where they can live. So initially, it was the cost for a very small company to hire talent. So it was a cost decision. But increasingly, instead of a cost decision, it became access to talent. And so for me, it became even more and more important to say, well, if I can hire anybody in the world, based on time zone availability and even and language, the pool of talent you have access to is incredible. If you're in the Bay Area, you can hire within maybe 30 miles radius, and you compete with Google, with Facebook, with LinkedIn, with all of these other companies. And frankly, I couldn't. That's not something that as a small company, self-finance, I could do. But if you have access to that pool of talent, it's really incredible, because I could find a medical doctor with a PhD and sometime an MBA in Mumbai, or in Canada, in Quebec, or in France. So the access to talent is a second value for me. And then recently, the other value for me has been the fact that because we used to not have any competition in working from home, we build long-term relationships with our team. So I would work with someone for 10 years, 5 years, 7 years. And, certainly in the Bay Area, that's unheard of. You work 1 year, and then they vest their stock option and they diversify by going to another tech company, maybe two, right? Right. And so when you work with someone 1 year or 2 years, you don't have time to really build a true trust relationship like we can do when we work long term. So these are the three reasons why I think that it's a wonderful model. It worked extremely well for us. I will add one thing, which is a fun of it, because then in the morning, this morning, for example, at 5 a.m., but I had a call with someone in Chile, our head of human resources in Chile, and I had a few people in India. So I could. You feel a citizen of the world, right? I can hear the little birds in the suburb of Mumbai outside of the window of my coworkers. It's a lot of fun as well.
So, we're talking here to a lot of people who are working in companies that are not yet or are not planning to be entirely virtual. How do they make that jump? Because, one of the constraints coming up is even if cities and places open up, which they're beginning to do, you can't sit people at long rows of desks or open plan offices the way we have in the past. So some form of virtuality is essential. How do you make that transition? What should people be looking for as they make that transition?
Well, my main learning over the years is that, and there are a lot of challenges with working from home. We could develop that. But my main learning is that it's easier if you're 100% virtual. If you're hybrid, it's harder. It's possible, but it's a different challenge. My experience and my successes have been with being nearly fanatically virtual. Nobody in the same office. I don't want to, I'm happy to meet people and I love it actually, but really no office. Because as soon as you have two people in the same office, the relationships are different. It's actually unfair a little bit for people who are far away. You cannot have coffee, you cannot have a beer, you cannot meet at the water cooler. So the relationship is going to be different, right? Especially if the leader of the company is in one location. So the opportunity here with COVID, with all of the drama, and I hope, by the way, that everybody's safe in the audience. It's a terrible time, and it's got to end at some point. We know that. So, and we got to learn something also. There's a silver learning. Part of it is what we're talking about today, which is the possibility of virtual office. But for me, if you can, from the beginning or during a crisis like this, go 100% virtual, it's a wonderful opportunity, and you can stay virtual after that. If you're partially virtual, it's harder. It has a different set of challenges in terms of the relationship in the team. 100% virtual, you have one office, essentially. It's Zoom or Skype and Slack or Microsoft Teams.
When you do this, is it important for people to be in their own home, or important for people to be in a dedicated workspace? I mean, I can see a little bit of a mess behind you and a sofa there. Sorry. Oh, yes, and your coworker, Miss Liberty. um,
Rick
but
Sanchez.
Okay, but in reality, is it important to have a dedicated workspace? Should that be in a WeWork type co-working space, or is it just as good to be at the kitchen table because you've got, the cat walks in, the kids come in. I hope we finish this webcast soon enough before my kids come back from the park. How do you what have you found as the best practices there?
I would say that part really depends on each company. For me, I believe in informality, and I believe that actually working from home is a way to reestablish informality of relationship. And so the environment is part of that. I want people to feel like they're coming in my home. I also have on Zoom the ability to create a virtual background. So I have a virtual background that looks like a Hollywood background with larval. Mm-hmm. Right. So when there's too much of a mess or I need to walk around, I put the virtual background on. Right. You know what I mean? There's no need for a green screen. It's a little bit fuzzy on the contour, but it's pretty good on Zoom. But I believe it's just a question of culture. It doesn't matter ultimately. Some companies like to create a little bit more of a formal environment. When I have a call with a client, I put the virtual background on. Mm-hmm. For example, right? Otherwise, I tend to have a bit of a messy background as well. I don't think it matters as much. And actually, the theme of working from home, to me, is essentially decompartmentalizing between your work and your life. And so the idea of being informal, for me, is part of that decompartmentalizing, understanding that it's not like you have work and life. Work is part of life. And why not be the same person in terms of behavior, style, demeanor, and also the same environment nearly, and dressing in some ways, working and not working. So that's also a question of culture. Some companies prefer to have clearer demarcation. But for me, I like that idea of not separating.
Well, you also run into other things about etiquette and protocol. For instance, last week there's a very funny incident. The U.S. Supreme Court has been holding its audiences, where the different attorneys present their cases to the court, not by Zoom, it being the Supreme Court, but by telephone conference call. And one of the justices forgot to mute his phone while he was eating lunch and then making a trip to the bathroom. An intrepid reporter at Salon, you can look for the article online, figured out which justice it was. I'll spare him the embarrassment here. But he was quite old and clearly somewhat technically challenged. How do you require to train people to do this? Or do you think most people today, that's more an exception, most people today can handle this pretty quickly?
So I don't know if it ever happened to me that I forgot to mute in a time that was embarrassing or problematic. If it happened, my team was very polite and they didn't tell me. They didn't tell me. So I feel that the same idea of informality, that essentially that idea that with Zoom and essentially people will have to accept a certain level of messiness, a certain level of mishaps, a certain level of, I don't know, problems, right? The cat jumping, or I'm eating and I thought I was on mute and you hear me masticating, right? Like the justice. So part of it, I think, will mean agreeing that if you have people work from home, you have to accept that there's going to be a certain level of informality and acceptance. And it's okay if one day I mishap and I look silly or worse. So I think it's part of that trend towards informality.
So let me ask you a couple of things more on the organizational psychology side of things. And one is that we know that our brains are hardwired for community. Loneliness causes actually, very significant physiological damage to the body, from constriction of arteries to rise in hypertension. Well, that creates the rise in hypertension. How do you build a sense of community among your employees or among your coworkers if your only interactions are, work-related and online? When, as you said at the beginning, there is no water cooler, no coffee pot.
Yeah. That's a very important point, and it should not be underestimated. How is my hair, by the way?
If you were next to me, I'd say something very different than I can say from out of reach.
Okay. So we are social creatures. We want interaction. We want to relate. We want physical presence. And when we stuck at home during COVID, or we work from home, we don't have any, or we have much less. Frankly, we're lonely. Right? And so it's a real issue with work from home. And for some people, it's too hard. And they're going to be depressed, actually. It could be a real problem. So, of course, they could go to Starbucks. They could go to a local coffee shop. They could go to WeWork, but work by themselves at WeWork, have a bit of an environment. But that lack of physical presence and interaction is a real issue. And I think we need to acknowledge it. And there are going to be probably studies down the road done about that. There's already a lot of couple that unfortunately break down with COVID because they're stuck together. They don't have other people. They don't have, right? It's hard. So for me, first, webcam helps. So I'm trying to tell people, when we have that formula, webcam if you can. Now, if it's 10 p.m. in Mumbai, you're in your pajamas, no, don't webcam, right? But if you can, webcam, right? It's okay if you have a T-shirt on. You don't need to have a shirt or anything, but because it creates a little bit of personal connection, right? You're less lonely, right? You talk with someone. Now, we also have once a month a happy hour. Mm-hmm. So we had 90 people on Zoom, right? And it's fun. We go around, we have little camaraderie things. So the theme for our company is tigers, for example, right? We're tigers. So we do at some point a cheer, like grrr, everybody does grrr. And so little things like that to recreate a sense of camaraderie, a sense of unity, okay? And helping with that problem of lack of interaction. I think ultimately it works with some people. For some other people, it's harder. So there need to be a level of motivation to work from home that in some ways is higher. People need to absolutely really want to, they need to be nearly more ambitious professionally to be successful in working from home. They need to be driven by their work. They need to be more serious in some ways, right? In their ambition, in their goals, in their drive, maybe in their work ethics, working from home, because it's harder. It's harder. I think it's better, but it is harder. In the image I used is that if you're working out and you go to the gym, it's much easier, right? All of a sudden you're stronger. Yeah. Now, why? Because first, everybody's working out. Second, everybody's looking at you.
Yeah, right? Yeah, absolutely. Community and shame work together to achieve all kinds of things. Yes.
So if you work in your basement by yourself, in the dark, whatever, it's not the same, right? As opposed to at Equinox or wherever, at the gym. So same thing in the office. You don't have that sense of buzz, excitement, reinforcement, camaraderie. So you need to be super motivated. You need to be so driven, right? And that's important because there's not that nearly Pavlovian team reinforcement of a physical environment.
Well, that brings up two other really key things to having an effective business team or an effective company. One is trust, and the other is creativity within your space. So let's tackle them one at a time. How do you build trust? I mean, I sit next to somebody in an office. I know them. I hear them. I see them. I sense their body movements. We go out for a coffee, a meal, and I understand the degree to which I can trust a person in certain areas. What are the no-go areas because of that contact with them? How do you build the necessary trust and put up the necessary barriers to ensure your own personal survival at a distance?
We should probably create a medical term, Zoom paranoia. Zoom paranoia. Mm-hmm. If you communicate mostly with someone on Zoom, and it could even be someone in the same city, but or on the other side of the world, you're going to become paranoiac at some point. Not all the time, hopefully, not with everybody, but there is a certain syndrome that is Zoom paranoia. You will think that they don't like you.
Yeah.
Maybe they're sabotaging your work. They don't do what you think they say they're going to do. And they don't do any work. There's Zoom paranoia, right? Because you don't have all of these usual reinforcement of trust that we have in person. So we have to acknowledge it. Zoom paranoia is real. And we have to first recalibrate in our mind, or that person hates me, or maybe it's Zoom paranoia. Then person is doing no work, or maybe it's Zoom paranoia, right? So that's the first part of your question. Yeah. The second part is creativity and innovation. And so this morning, actually, at 5, we had a call for an idea contest, which we have twice a year, where everybody is sending ideas. And then we have an exercise where we rate the idea, rank them, and we have winners. Mm-hmm. And so this morning, 5 of the finalists all had 10 minutes to present their ideas. So that's one way we're trying to make sure that ideas percolate in the organization. Because you're right, it's not as easy to be creative when you don't have that sort of very active back and forth between people. Or ideas are very slow to move because speed is a currency, right? I mean, essentially, the fastest organization is going to win, right? And so a virtual organization has to be faster or as fast, but ideally faster. What I tell my team is that the speed at which a message goes from me to Christelle to you back to me determines the IQ of our organization, right? So if Christelle sits 2 days on an email there or a message, right, or a request, that's going to slow our IQ, right? But I know both of you are super fast. So if you can do it in minutes, you'll do it in minutes, not in hours or not in days. And then our IQ goes up. And so same thing with creativity. And so it's part of culture, really, is that we need, and a lot of it fall on the shoulder of leadership. We need to create a culture that supports creativity, that supports super high expectations, right? Because if not, we're not going to we got to lose against companies that maybe are not virtual, but they're faster and they're more driven. So we need to make sure that people understand that, as we say in France, this is not the Club Med. We are all friendly. There's a lot of camaraderie, and we're all having fun. But we are on a mission. And unless there's that common sense of we're on a mission, maybe our ship is a virtual ship, right? But we're all on the same ship. And we have to avoid the iceberg, the pirates. We have to go on, do our mission. Unless there's that sense of we're really into the most exciting mission of our career, and our ship is a virtual ship, all right, it's going to be hard to compete, because the other one have the ability to have beer and pizza after work until 10 p.m.
Right. Let me go back for a quick second to this question of trust. You mentioned when we spoke earlier about transparency as a way to build trust and deal with the Zoom paranoia. I just wondered if briefly you could talk a little bit about how you can create that transparency in a virtual organization without obviously, going too far into people's personal space, evaluation, that kind of thing.
So the formula I'm using is to say we lost proximity. Okay, we have to replace it with extreme transparency. And that's how we create the trust, the long-term trust. So if we are as transparent as we were in an office, without the proximity, we're not going to be able to succeed. We need more transparency. And more transparency is extremely hard. Nobody wants it, to be frank with you. We say we want transparency. No, we don't. People don't want it. And especially management, often leadership doesn't want to give it because it's not fun, right? Because, I mean, it's fun for overachievers. Oh, you're doing a great job. That's fun. People who are not doing such a great job, we need help, we need feedback. Nobody wants to give that feedback. So how do you create transparency, and transparency that is going to be positive and constructive? To me, that's a formula. And that has been the formula of management forever, but even more in a COVID or in a virtual environment. And so, I mean, Jack Welch just died a couple of months ago, and I've been a big fan of his. Of course, he's a hardcore leader. I mean, many people didn't like him, right? He's very, very hardcore. But his point is transparency also, right? His point is, essentially evaluating people on a curve, right? He has the top performers, 20%, then the middle, then the right, and really telling people if they're doing well or not. Because my experience has been that 2/3 of any companies think that they are in the top 20% performers. And often organizations reinforce that because we don't want transparency. So our job is to make sure people know that we still love you. You're great. We don't want you to leave. But this quarter or this year, you are not in the top 20%. That's okay. But we want to support you, right? And we don't want you to be in the bottom 20% too long. But you need to know that in terms of performance, you're there for your good, for the good of the organization too, but also for your good, right? Because it's your career. You only have so much time. And we want you to be successful. So we need to provide that transparency, that feedback. And for me, the idea of having tiers with a limit, right? So 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, and the top 1/3 is not half of the company, has been my tool. It's extremely hard. Nobody likes it. I have to essentially push it because I believe in it. But for me, that's my way to create transparency. And the key is to do it in a positive way, which we try to do, but we're not always successful because it's very hard.
Take me back to this question of the talent pool. And when we've spoken earlier, we talked about the fact that there are a lot of people who have reasons that they can't go into a workplace. I mean, not just the geographical thing of, yes, you can pay a programmer in India less than a programmer in the Bay Area, but that there are people out there who might not even be working because of family or personal situations or disability, that kind of thing.
Before COVID, my approach has been that I will only hire people who must work from home. And nearly not by choice. It's not that they slightly prefer or they're ambivalent. There need to be a very specific reason why they have to work from home, because I know how hard it is. Now everybody has to work from home, so it's different. And post-COVID, it'll be fascinating to see how habits will change. But before COVID, for me, the rule to hire someone was that they must work from home. Why? Well, maybe they have, maybe they're stuck. For example, the second most senior person in the company is stuck in Detroit. She's an MD. She's a PhD, sorry, right? She's extremely talented. Her husband works for a car company. She's stuck in Detroit. There's no pharma company in Detroit. She cannot work in pharma. So perfect case where we provide something that she cannot find otherwise. Other cases, especially outside of the US, maybe when people have elderly parents, they stay right at home. They don't have senior care support. Right? Someone needs to help the parents or the grandparents, and so they have to stay at home, or they have young kids. Or let's say in the suburb of Mumbai, someone has a PhD, maybe a woman, and they have young kids. She has young kids, or she has to commute 2 hours. I heard that in an interview 1 week ago. 2 hours commute both ways to go to work at Accenture. Right? She could work at Accenture, no problem. But 2 hours during the monsoon in Mumbai, you've got water until here, right? Yeah. Up to your knees. So our criteria is, our first criteria was people who must work from home. They in many cases, they would not work, essentially, right? But they have a wonderful talent. Or sometimes it's also cultural. There is some cultural reason why women in some part of the world have to take care of the family. But they have a great degree, they have great talent, they're extremely intelligent, they are very ambitious. So that system allows them to work. Or work part-time, by the way, because here's the other thing. If someone works from home, it doesn't matter if they're part-time, full-time, right? Because you don't see how many hours they spend. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't matter. Is it part-time, full-time? Maybe they have a second job. You can just look at their output and their availability, right? So all of a sudden, people who want to work part-time, people who want two jobs, people who have special constraints can work, right? It doesn't matter what time they work or even how many hours they work, because when you work from home, you cannot measure that anyway.
So we're about to run out of time here. So let me ask you one last thing. If you are some smart, tech-oriented person, you've got your new idea, you want to start your own company, I think there's going to be a lot of disruption after COVID as companies adjust, people move on, etc. Is there any point at all to starting a company with a physical presence, or in your view, should everybody just think about virtual?
I would tell everybody, start a virtual company. Please do not start a physical company. Later on, you can shift. If you realize that it's too hard to manage, okay, it's too difficult to create that culture, you can shift. But it's very hard to shift the other way. If you start with an office and 2 people or 3, it's going to be very hard later on to truly embrace the virtual office. So I really urge people, not only is cheaper, faster, at first they don't have the choice right now. By the way, now is a great time to start a company. There's so much talent that is not occupied, right? It's a wonderful time. It's probably the single best time to start a company is right now. So if people have an idea for a company, I think they owe it to themselves to start now, today, to start now, and to do it absolutely virtually. They can, if it doesn't work, they can shift to a traditional brick and mortar equivalent in an office that we work later on. If we work is still there, right? But I think they absolutely should try it. It's such an incredible opportunity right now. They just have to be ready for the challenges that we discussed today, and understand that people will have to create trust in different ways, create a culture in a different way. As I said the other day, really, culture eats a strategy for breakfast. Culture is so important. In a virtual company, it's everything. The culture of the company is everything.
And you don't have any qualms about never seeing in downtown San Francisco the Lavrol Tower?
Actually, I do have an office at WeWork just next to the Salesforce tower. If you look at each time the tallest building in a city have been built, it was when that company has peaked, whether it's Sears Tower. I won't comment about Salesforce, but because we're
GM in New York. Yeah, I know. I completely agree. Yeah.
So maybe we'll have a virtual tower one day.
Okay. Well, very quickly, if anyone has a question that they want to send into the chat. Nope. Okay, we're good. Bruno Lavrol, founder and CEO of Lavrol, a pharma and pharma-related software data company. Thank you very, very much for joining us with these great lessons about establishing and running a virtual company. To the rest of you out there, stick with me for 30 more seconds. At 2 o'clock Eastern Time, which is in about 25 minutes, we will be hosting a new webinar led by Jeff Mignon. Jeff is the Chief Growth Officer of Pentalog, and he's going to be hosting something we call a Growth Jam. We're teaching you actually how to host a Growth Jam, which is a way for you to build up the backlog of orders and come up with ideas for something we call the minimum viable test, the MVT, that lets you see if a new business idea is actually viable before you roll it out across your whole company. So sign up, please, on the link that you can see in the chat next to this. And I hope we'll see a lot of you back at 2 o'clock. If not, next Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern, we'll be here for another edition of PentaLive. Thanks to everyone. I'm Peter Green in New York saying ciao, ciao.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.